remember the first time that I changed the brake pads on my car. My friend and I were able to quickly get the car up on jack stands. We removed the wheel. We took off the brake caliper and removed the old brake pads. We quickly were able to install the new brake pads. But then when we tried to put the caliper over the brake rotor, it wouldn't fit because the new pads were certainly much thicker than the old ones. We struggled with this for a good 30 to 45 minutes before we finally realized we weren't going to be able to make this happen on our own. So we got into his car and drove down to the local Napa auto shop and asked for some advice, for some help. The salesman quickly said, "You just need this tool. We have it here and we loan it out for free." And so he gave it to us and then also gave us the tip to unscrew the cap on the brake fluid tank. We went back to the garage, and using the advice and the tools we had been given, we quickly were able to finish the job. There's this thing called the Pareto principle, which says that 80% of consequence comes from 20% of the cause. In the brake pad example, we got 80% of the way there with our 20% of skill. You see, we needed some help to finish the job from somebody who had the experience and the training necessary to get that last bit completed. They had put in the extra work to learn the necessary information. In other examples used in people who study the Pareto principle, they might say something like 20% of criminals commit 80% of crimes, or 20% of drivers cause 80% of all traffic accidents. 20% of the population has 80% of the wealth. Tim Ferriss applies the Pareto principle to learning a language. He says, to understand 95% of a language and become conversational fluent may require 3 months of applied learning. But to reach the 98% threshold could require 10 years. There is a point of diminishing returns where, for most people, it makes more sense to acquire more languages or skills versus adding 1% of improvement over 5 years. What about that jump from proficiency to expertise, from conversation to fluency? If we take the inverse of the Pareto principle, that means that last 20% comes from 80% of the effort. Caramelized onions aren't the star. They are a little component that elevates a dish. No one's going to eat a big bowl full of caramelized onions for a meal, although I would contend they're tasty enough to do so. It's just not something you do, though. And if you've watched the first part of the Caramelized Onion series, then you know there's an investment of time that is needed to develop the flavor. One of my favorite breakfasts of all time is the sorrel pesto rice bowl at Squirrel in Silver Lake. On the surface, it's brown rice, hot sauce, pesto sauce, a little bit of feta, topped with a poached egg. Now, I could go home, cook up some rice, toss in some store-bought pesto, a little bit of tapatio, some feta, and top it with a poached egg, and I would probably be 80% of the way there. But it's not a Squirrel sorrel pesto rice bowl. What we often miss is this element that makes great food from great chefs like Squirrel's Jessica Koslow. What we often fail to see, and what we need to understand, is that the lacto-fermented hot sauce and the preserved Meyer lemons that garnish her dish take weeks to develop the flavors that contribute to the meal. Not to mention the months of dedication it took to perfect the sorrel pesto. And then there's the sourcing of the premium brown rice. You see, the components that combine to make up that incredible dish are the result of expertise gained over years of dedication. There's this unrealistic expectation that we can make the same jump as we did in the beginning with the same effort. It it's why I wasn't able to get those brake pads over the caliper. I thought, man, this is going so well. This is so easy. But there is knowledge, there is experience that comes into play. In faith, we often chase mountaintops. Some of us actually went to mountaintops to try and find that experience that made up that initial 80% of our experience with God. That first encounter we had with him that is so profound and so powerful. We chase that instead of realizing that there's real opportunity to get to know our God in the in-between spaces. When the Israelites were freed from Egypt and headed into the desert, God provided them with daily manna, daily provision. Each morning they could go out and collect that day's provisions. If they tried to collect more than the daily need and hoard it and store it, it would spoil, and they would have to wait until morning to get that next day's provisions. When Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, he says, "Give us this day our daily bread." Not give us an entire year's worth right now. Because for Jesus, being a disciple is a daily pursuit. It's something that happens not only in the mountaintops, but also in the day-to-day, in the mundane, in the daily. Do we spend too much time reliving the first 80% of our relationship with God? Do we spend too much time pursuing that mountaintop experience that really just is the same thing over and over? Do we do that because it's easier than putting in that 80% of effort that it will take to get us the rest of the way? I'm not trying to quantify our relationship with God, but I do believe we do the easy part over and over. And we don't really seek out the experiences, the challenges, the knowledge, the wrestling that it takes to gain a deeper, more authentic knowledge of our God and his way of living.